Hi, I am Larry Becker, and I am very happy to welcome you to our live stream. The wait is over. The Canon 5D Mark IV is out, and we are talking about it here today with a distinguished panel of B&H guests and some folks from Canon USA. I'd like to introduce you to our panel, and I'm going to start at the far end with Ken Sklute, who is an explorer of light. Ken, thank you so much for coming.
Oh, Larry, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so excited to be able to, pardon me, share my experiences about the new 5D4. And it's just a super machine, but thank you. It's wonderful to be part of this esteemed panel.
That's true. It's an amazing group of folks. Continuing with Denis Reggie, also an explorer of light, a very elite class of photographers, and two in the same room.
Oh, well, you're very kind. I tell you, when they asked me to be an explorer of light some years ago, I just said, does that mean I can play with cameras before they're on the market? And they said yes. And I can talk to engineers about ideas that they might put into these cameras. They said yes. I said, well, okay, I'll do that. I mean, I'm a wedding photographer at heart, but honored to be among the group of us that are Canon Explorers of Light, and thrilled to be here today. I've been shooting with these, all three of these products that we're going to talk about today. The camera, the 5D Mark IV, and of course the two amazing lenses. So I'll have some feedback to share with you and our audience today.
That sounds great, and I am looking forward to hearing what the pros think about this great piece of gear. And there are pros on the other side of the camera as well. I have with me Brent Ramsey. Now, Brent, you are going to talk on this panel on behalf of Canon about the technology side of the video components.
That's right, and I want to just caution you. We talk about the technical part of it. At heart, I'm just a DP. But you've got to know the technology today to make a smart decision, to choose a camera, to buy a camera. And I'm happy to be here to talk about some exciting new video features in the 5D Mark IV.
Also, I'm very thankful that my friend Rudy Winston from Canon USA is on the panel, because I got the briefing from you on this incredible piece of gear. So hopefully you'll be able to dispense some of that knowledge to our live audience. Thanks for being here, Rudy.
Oh, Larry, the pleasure's mine. Delighted to be with you, with B&H's customers, and of course with our esteemed guests as well. And it's a real opportunity for me to get out and talk about something I love to talk about, which is our cameras and photography.
And absolutely great gear. So what I do want to do before we get into this is I want to let you know about some things that are available to you as viewers. There's a hashtag that you're going to want to use on social media, and it is hashtag BHPhotoLive. Now make sure that you use that, and feel free to ask questions, because at the end, this panel is going to be answering your questions as a part of this live stream. And if we don't happen to get to your questions, don't fear. B&H is committed to answering all of your questions, whether it's on Facebook or on Twitter. Make sure you use the hashtag BHPhotoLive, and then whatever your questions are, and B&H Photo will answer them if we don't get to them here on the air. Additionally, I want to let you know that you have a chance to win this incredible camera. The 5D Mark IV is available for pre-order right now on the B&H website. And during this live stream only, if you happen to pre-order during this live stream, you're one of the few that's eligible to win. So somebody that pre-orders during the live stream will be chosen as a winner of the new 5D Mark IV, an incredible, incredible piece of gear. Now, I want to let you know also that B&H has put together a video about the 5D Mark IV, and we have a shortened version of that video for you to see right now.
Here it is, the Canon 5D Mark IV. You'll be pleased to hear that many of Canon's best developments over the years have now made it into the 5D Mark IV. So at the heart of the camera is an all-new Canon 30.4 megapixel full-frame sensor. The Mark IV provides a nice increase in resolution over the Mark III, while improving sensitivity in its base ISO all the way up to 32,000. The Digic 6 Plus processor also allows for increased shooting speeds, now up to 7 FPS. The camera offers a new 61-point reticular AF system, which delivers a vertically extended focusing area for enhanced subject capture, which is great for nature, wildlife, and sports shooters. The Mark IV also has a mirror vibration system similar to the one found in the 5DS and 5DSR in order to reduce vibrations caused by the mirror flipping up during capture. For live view stills and video recording, Canon's dual-pixel CMOS AF adds incredibly responsive autofocusing, and with the new 3.2-inch touchscreen LCD, you can tap to select the AF area instantly. In terms of video, the 5D Mark IV brings full DCI 4K recording into the mix, recording 4096 by 2160. Using a high bitrate motion JPEG codec, the 4K image is pristine and captures at both 24 and 30 FPS. The camera can also shoot 60 FPS at 1080p and 120 FPS at 720p. Plus, the in-camera time-lapse and HDR movie modes add further flexibility. Here we have two new lenses, the EF 16-35 f2.8L Mark III and the 24-105 f4L Mark II. Both lenses have ultrasonic motors, and the 24-105 also includes image stabilization. With air sphere coating to reduce flare and ghostings, these lenses promise superior performance over their predecessors. So there you have it. The 5D Mark IV is here with an all-new sensor, faster shooting speeds, dual-pixel CMOS AF, and cinema-ready 4K video. It's a solid upgrade for photo and video shooters alike, and what better way to get the most out of it than with some shiny new glass? From B&H, my name is Doug. Thanks for watching.
Now, the 5D Mark IV, well, actually the 5D family really brought photography, full-frame photography to the masses. And we're going to start off by talking about photography. We will get into video. We'll talk about these great lenses that have been announced. But I want to start with a question for you, Denis. You have quite an extensive experience with photography. What do you look for in a new camera, and how does this camera stand up to your demands?
Well, as many may know, I'm a wedding photographer, have been for many years, and I've been a huge advocate of the predecessor cameras to the one being introduced today. Certainly going back to the original 5D, and then the 2, and then the 5D3, which is currently in my bag back in Atlanta, and my assistants as well. Phenomenal product. What's Canon going to do to beat the 5D3? Well, here we have the announcement today. Wow, and what a job they've done. The 5D Mark IV, we go from the 22 now up to the 30 plus megapixels of resolution. Flat out incredible. They've done a number of enhancements as well. Of course, the ergonomics have been second to none. Wedding photographers like a fairly light camera. This one's even an ounce or two less heavy, lighter than the predecessor. Did you notice?
Did you feel it?
No, but it is also a touch smaller, very slightly smaller, but it just feels right. It always has. Now it's even more so. They've done some tweaking with the mirror. The mirror used to always be done with spring action. No more. Now it's a very smart motor to make it even slow down before it slaps to the top. I think even the dark time has been diminished. So Canon has done some lovely, lovely refinements. Uses the same battery, which is certainly nice. What does 30 megapixels do to a wedding shooter? Well, it gives us the great ability to photograph groups, to have a contingency for a wall portrait here and there, croppability. We did some things with the test, the pre-production camera out in California, I guess last month or so, where we did horizontals and then crop them out. Here's some shots, in fact, from that Napa Valley shoot. This is done with the 100 macro with models. This is not an actual wedding, but great expressions and fun. The camera is tack sharp. They've done something with the color as well. Here I go to my 2470. Again, these are bride and groom models at a winery in Napa. And of course, this model said, I can jump in the air, and he did. So we shot that quite a few times. He could clack his heels. I've never seen someone that could actually do that in person so handily. So we photographed him. And again, these available light shots. The camera is remarkable. The sharpness of it, the quietness of it, the tactile feel of it. Incredibly refined is what I would say. The screen on the back of the camera now is unlike any other 5D 1, 2, or 3. It now has 60% more dots. We're up to I guess 1.6 million dots. To my eye, as a photographer, I see this screen, and maybe Rudy can comment on it later, I see it as a touch warmer than the predecessors. Looks like the images look a little bit more like I'll want them to be in the bride's album, ultimately. So if you're packing a 5D4 and a 5D3, and now the screens don't match, they've thought of that as well. You can actually change the color temp of the 5D4's screen to match the predecessor, or what I'm going to do is, because I'm going to sell off my 3s and move to the 4s exclusively, I'm going to basically have that nice warm image. It's brilliant, and here comes my finger for the first time on the back screen. Never had that on a 5D3.
Right, the touch screen capability.
Yeah, in many ways. For menu selecting, isn't that just lovely? But also for pinch and swipe. No more fingering around, thumbs and fingers to zoom up. I can just, like I would do on my smartphone, just pinch and zoom. So there are a number of features, and I know we'll be talking about a lot of them today, but
sure.
Weddings are my thing. I've done them for 30 plus years,
right.
Over 2,000 of them. But I would say to you that I think this camera, the 5D4, and I think for the first time, Canon has an incredibly versatile camera that I think goes well beyond just the camera bag of a wedding photographer, a serious amateur or a professional. Why do I say that? Because when you go to 30 megapixels, when you go to 7 frames a second instead of 6, well, now we're in maybe a sports territory as a backup, or maybe even a primary camera,
right.
Fashion, other areas that need more speed, the size, family portrait, so
sure.
a lot of things like that. So I have a lot of things that to me, collectively have made this camera just a must-have. It's the gold standard for weddings, and then some.
Sure. And speaking of and then some, Ken, your work spans a lot of different genres. And so, first of all, tell people what your comfort zone is, what kinds of photography you do, and how does the 5D4 play into your style?
Well, a bunch of great questions. What I'm looking for, I'm a fine art, a landscape photographer, and I'm lucky enough to be photographing a lot of subject matter that you just can't see. And having that ability, you know, Dennis, you've touched on a lot of the great features that built into now the 5D Mark IV. The ability to get in there and with that touch screen, make any changes that I want. I work in the dark a lot. So here it's just perfect that I don't have to climb over the camera if I have a high camera position, but I can just bring up that Q menu. I can make my changes, be it an ISO, shutter speed, white balance, whatever I'm looking to change, and then especially review the images. So when I'm out in the desert at night, I'm photographing the Milky Way and it's midnight, there's no moon out, it's absolutely dark. This camera is very friendly to me. And you know, going through the different things that I photograph, the ability to photograph lightning, the ability to photograph tornadoes, the unique things that I come across, this camera just plays right up to it. That I'm so comfortable with all of the features. And
sure.
You know, Dennis, you touched on all the great qualities in the camera, and I know we're all going to bring out our favorite thoughts. One of the wonderful things to me is the ability to switch from still photographs to video to time lapse. There are so many different tools now that we have in that camera itself without having to go to accessories. So I'm going to share some of those thoughts, I guess, in a little while with some of the time lapses and things that I can bring into showing the diversity and how somebody can really reach and dig into this camera to not only record the still photograph that everybody's used to with an HD SLR, but moving into video and then pulling out a frame grab, and we'll talk more about that in a few moments.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that my two explorers of light on the panel aren't shy at all about loving the touchscreen. And when I heard about the touchscreen, I thought, that's going to be great. And here you're justifying that, that thought. Thank you very much for that. Rudy, I want to talk to you a little bit about the focus system. Now, we have seen dual pixel CMOS AF, starting with the 70D. Then it was improved with the 80D and now the 1DX2, and it's on board here with the 5D4. First of all, what does that technology, that focusing technology, mean to the end user? What's it going to do? How is it going to change the experience?
Well, when we talk dual pixel CMOS autofocus, we're talking strictly about a tool for live view and for video, and I'm sure my colleague Brent Ramsey can talk in depth about it as a video tool. In terms of for still imaging, it's going to give you very smooth and positive focusing. And the differences in terms of the new 5D Mark IV, the imaging sensor itself, which is where the focusing data is taken from, is even more sensitive. We're able to work in lower light, and correspondingly, we're able to work with servo autofocus as well. It's the first full-frame EOS camera with dual pixel CMOS that we can continuously focus on a moving subject, and we can even continuously shoot up to over 4 frames a second. It also is the first full-frame camera to give us the option of being able to focus over a broad area with what we're calling FlexiZone Multi, where the camera can kind of pick a focusing point for us automatically if we want. So you got the low light capability, you've got the inherent smoothness and positive action of dual pixel CMOS. And it really is a winning combination. And one last thing, you hit on the touch screen earlier, and with the touch screen, you can now just in live view, just tap here, the camera will focus there. Tap here, the camera will focus there. It is dandy.
All new experience for 5D users. Denis, I want to talk to you a little bit about your feelings about the autofocus performance. What do you think? How did it feel?
Performed, I thought, just absolutely magnificently. We did some follow focus with these models, brides and grooms, and I don't think we lost a single frame. Of course, I'm a big fan of AI servo. The predictive on the Canon has always been great. This camera has a faster processor. We've gone now from the predecessor, the 5D3 had the, I think it's the 5 Plus. Help me, Rudy, if I make a mistake on this. And of course, the new 5D4 announced today, it's 6 Plus. What does that mean? It means that it's got a bigger engine to process these images. Probably there's better noise reduction, I'm sure, built into there, just general performance. But as it relates to a moving target, and from my world, it's dad and daughter coming up the aisle to hand off, his prized possession to that guy, that lucky guy that's at the front of the aisle, or the married couple coming down the aisle. That's, you're talking about AI servo. Knowing me, I'm probably gonna pick my box where I want it to be, as opposed to what some people do where they just use the center one.
Sure.
I'd rather have my joystick, as I call it, sort of pick a point that makes sense and let that system, AI servo, or AI is of course artificial intelligence, where it's moving with them, and when the mirror moves up, it still knows where they are based on their foot per second movement prior to the blackout period. So it's phenomenal. It's very, very smart. So I'm ending up with a high percentage of very usable images. Much of my work, because I like shallow depth of field, I think Ken's probably the same way, is wide open aperture, or very near to it. So the focus has to be good. I'm not giving it 5/6 worth of slack. I'm giving it wide open 2.8, or sometimes in the ones, depending on the lens, obviously, where I'm making the camera really do its business. This camera performed very, very well. Other things that I noticed that are not so much written in the literature of the announcement, but, and I'll ask Ken about this too, because you've shot it as well, Ken, this business of shadow detail in post-production.
Sure.
Whether it was JPEG or we had a pre-production beta of the software to use a raw file, but anytime we would wake up a shadow, we wouldn't see noise, we wouldn't see banding, we would see detail that I'm not sure I've seen before in this type of camera. So I was very, very impressed. Did you notice the same, Ken?
I did, and thank you for bringing that up. One of the great things is the expanded
native ISO.
Well, not even so much native ISO, but the dynamic range.
Dynamic range, yeah.
The concept, especially the environment that I live in, is outdoors. It's really looking at an HDR. It's really looking at a bright background, deep shadows that we kind of have to consistently make a determination. Am I going to go HDR? Is there enough that I'm able to capture now? And upon immediate review of the imagery, this image of a cactus right in front of me, it has highlights, it's got shadows, I didn't have to do much to it, and it's just got a better tonal range all the way through, and I'm really excited about that.
It's a beautiful shot. I mean, you nailed it, as you always do so often, but you
you.
absolutely nailed it.
Now, with respect to that shot, or all of your shots, what do you think about the low light performance? Because it has been increased.
Well, and it certainly has. That is a big part of my environment. I'm out in the desert, I'm shooting at midnight, I'm shooting all the way through the night, and I need that high ISO. I virtually live at 6400. And I know when I teach and I lead workshops, people are amazed that you can capture at 6400, and I creep it up a little beyond that. I'm into the 10,000 range on this camera, and knowing that I have all that information in there and that the image doesn't degrade when I get it back and examine it on the monitor, it's just wonderful to see all of that detail there, the sharpness, the dynamic range. It's got everything that in a very difficult environment comes shining through.
And,
I agree.
And those are the results. Rudy, I want to ask you about the capture side of things, the technology. The metering sensor is greatly improved on the 5D4. Tell me a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes with the autofocus, or rather the metering sensor.
Yeah, we've seen this before on some other EOS cameras, the 5DS and 5DSR. the 7D Mark II, and certainly the 1DX Mark II that we recently introduced. We've gone over to a color metering system, an RGB metering system, where the metering sensor now really is almost analogous to like a small, tiny imaging sensor. So it not only reads light, it can read color, it can go beyond that and read, read patterns, and it can recognize and read faces as well.
That's amazing.
And it actually uses facial information for exposure metering purposes. In general, you're going to find the color metering system in these cameras is going to be even, not just more responsive, but it'll tend to be even more accurate in situations where certain colors that used to fool the metering system slightly and you had to kind of tweak a little bit to kind of get the exposures where you want, you're probably going to find a little less of that with this camera now than you might have with a previous version of the 5D camera that used conventional metering. Sure. And it really is a nice step forward.
Denis, I want to talk to you a little bit about wedding photography and what's available with the 5D4. There was a challenge with the switch to digital, of course, and now you're there with the digital. Did you ever think we'd be able to do these kinds of things?
It's like having a medium format resolution in a tiny, hand-holdable camera. It's really phenomenal. And of course, to see the lenses that Canon continues to introduce and let us professionals and serious amateurs as well enjoy, it's really an incredible combination. To build on what Rudy said, and this is a feature
Sure.
of the 5D4, which I think is so incredible, he talked about facial recognition. You're exactly right. For those of us shooting weddings, well, I mean, our subjects are in white typically, or black, which means that if the metering is reading an area other than their face, I'm probably going to be, to be honest, off on exposure, because a white dress reflects so much, the system will want to shut down a bit, close it down, whereas if it's on black, it's going to want to open up a bit. But if it's on the face, I've got a pretty darn good chance of having a superb meter reading. Canon meters have been phenomenal for a number of years, but this is yet another enhancement that's going to make folks like me who are involved in the wedding space, dealing with folks wearing white and black. This isn't so much a feature for the color metering, but it's all about the facial recognition. And this is going to be the case if you're in evaluative mode, which I am for most all of the wedding, for available light, but also when I go to ETTL2, when I'm using the brand new 600EX2, that thing is phenomenal. If you saw me shooting, as I mentioned in our break earlier, I'm not going to point a flash at a human being. I'm that guy, or that photographer who's going to turn the head of the flash, even though it's on the hot shoe. I'm going to turn it away. I'm going to use the walls, maybe the ceiling. I'm going to bounce it, and I'm going to temper the light. Flash in its normal way is going to emit 5,500 degrees Kelvin. That's kind of a bluish-white daylight. But most wedding receptions that I do, unless I'm working in California that weekend, when it's probably outdoors, but if I'm inside, the truth be known, it's much closer to 3,200 or somewhere in those high 2,000 degree temperatures. I want my flash to not stand out as that blue-white beacon in
Sure.
an otherwise warm environment. So I'm going to click on, and Canon's done a great job on that new 600EX2 flash. It was maybe introduced 2 or 3 months ago, but it clicks right on. It's nice and sturdy, but it allows me to have illumination that more closely emulates the ambient color temperature. That, coupled with the 5D4, which now takes us from a 25,600 ISO native max. Well, the native maximum is now 32,000. They've given us another third of a stop. And as Ken and I both agreed, we also have that additional shadow detail, dynamic range, if we want to call
Right.
it that. Post-production can wake up and find it's not just noise or banding. There's good information there. Plus, of course, you've got almost 40% more pixels from the predecessor 5D3. So it's been this morning was a very good day when this camera was announced, to say the least.
I agree. And you were mentioning some of the differences and changes, improvements since the 5D3. Ken, I want to get your take on this, because there is no frame of reference other than what we're talking about here today for most of the people that are watching. They haven't had hands-on yet. You've had a lot of hands-on with the 5D4. So would you let our audience know, people that are familiar with the 5D3, what can they expect when they pick up a 5D4? What are the changes and differences? What does it feel like as a shooter?
Well, one of the great things is that it feels just like the old baby. That you're comfortable with it, you know where everything is. Nothing has really been redesigned. But within that now, we have so much more to play with and so much more at our fingertips. That being the ability to change your exposure, to change things with the Q menu, to review your images as a simple swipe across. We're not turning dials or anything. So to me, that's really powerful. But to get well beyond that, the thing that's exciting for me about going into the 5D Mark IV is the ability, I shot some time lapses, and to have the time lapse produced and completed within the camera. So I'm setting my ranges, I let that thing go. Normally I have to go home and finish and produce 300, 500 different images and crunch that into the time lapse. And here, out of what's playing in front of you, that's an in-camera time lapse where I looked at this as soon as the image capture was complete. And that's just brilliant to me. And then taking it beyond even the time lapse world where I'm working with motion control, moving into the video portion of it and going into some other extremes like photographing the storm that you see up in front of you, watching that storm grow amongst the setting sun, and then it kind of disappears. So I caught that on video. There were a couple of things that I'll now shoot on video, speed up to go to the time-lapse perspective, if you would, where we're kind of crunching time, or going into photographing and capturing in a video mode, but now going beyond the video and being able to pull out an 8.8 megapixel frame, a frame grab out of the 4K video.
It's incredible.
That's just brilliant. That's where I saw this going 15 years ago when I came into the digital arena. And I thought, boy, it's not going to be long before our different styles of capture, Brent, what goes on in video and what goes on in stills, we're finally at that junction of it becoming one that, depending upon the quick-moving features in front of us, can we capture it on video? And then, in my case, I was extracting frame grabs of lightning going off in a storm and having that magnificent frame so I can turn my attention to other things.
That's exactly what I want to talk about. We have spent some time on photography, and we do need to move on and talk about video, and you've already started down that path. And I want to ask you, Brent, would you please let our audience know just an overview of some of the incredible new things that are a part of this camera, including 4K video and the improved performance all around, different file types.
Absolutely.
Would you run through that?
Well, so we all appreciate on this stage. I know everyone can appreciate where the 5D series cameras come from, and especially how important it was with the launching of HD video in an SLR body, and how much we appreciate using that form factor, that compact form factor that the 5D series created. But now we've gone so much further with the inclusion in this camera of a bunch of firsts. And we're talking about the first camera that has, the first of the 5D series that has 4K capture. This is up to 30 frames a second, and that's 4096 by 2160. That's a 17 by 9 image like our other cameras. It's also the first 5D camera to have the 60p at full HD. So we have that, and we have 60p in All-I or IPB. It also is the first one to add MP4. It's the first one to add the 4K frame grab feature that you guys are in love with, right? It's
incredible.
And so what we've seen, and there's
would you just share a little bit, because I understand the 4K workflow, would you share a little bit about exactly what's going on? Because that's something that's new to a lot of shooters, especially still shooters.
Well, so you shoot a 4K clip, and it only works in 4K, but you shoot a 4K clip, then you go into playback, and then you have that option of shuttling through frame by frame and selecting that exact micro moment. And then there's like some scissors that says that when you hit that, it goes, do you want to save this to your card, And you go, yeah, sure, why not? And now you have an individual 8.8 megapixel, which is a small file, about 2 megabytes or so. I don't really know exactly, but kind of a small file that you can instantly share to your smartphone, because yes, now it's the first 5D series with built-in Wi-Fi. You can share that with a free app from Canon, the Camera Connect app, and in seconds put it on to any social media network or to your friend or to your producer, get approvals and things like that. So the 4K frame grab has become that perfect integration of still meets video, and where it used to be still and video were two separate features we looked for in cameras, we've now seen them meet in a way that this camera shows how integral the two can be and in what harmony they can work in.
It's like having really a 30 frame per second motor drive, if you think of it that way.
Sure.
I mean,
yeah.
You're looking for the bolt of lightning coming from the sky. Right. I'm looking for that twinkle in the eye when dad looks at his daughter before he hands her off, or maybe that happy couple when the rice is not in front of their faces, but it's just the rice or whatever, the rose petals are falling on their face without obliterating it. It may be that just which of those 30 frames in a second.
And Dennis, you can get that up to a 4,000th of a second. So now you're talking about some incredible sports shutter speeds, right? So for action sports or the wildlife moment or whatever that you're not expecting to see, but you want to be ready for anyway, yes, 30 frames a second, pick your frame, print it, send it off, save it on the card, save it as a JPEG image.
8.8 megapixels is very versatile. That is wedding album and then some.
Absolutely.
That's a great size file. I've seen them. We tried this, and it's just, I think it's really a game changer.
I don't want to just stop with the deliverables, though, because it's not just about what kind of files the camera has. It's in this particular camera, the 5D Mark IV, there are so many operation upgrades that they've made to make video shooting like a dream, so simple. And I know that all the still photographers get asked to deliver video all the time, and a lot of people are out there making decisions about, well, should I get a video camera or a still camera? So with this camera and dual pixel autofocus that you guys just touched on, and the touchscreen technology, now you're allowed to operate the camera, make all of your decisions right there very quickly without diving into camera menus, right?
Well, one of the things on that line is in the 70D, and I love this feature because I am not a professional videographer, but I can rack focus because I have a 70D. And then it improved with the 80D, and you have the ability to rack focus at 7 predetermined speeds. Can we do that with this camera as well?
Yes, speed settings, there's actually 10 of those. There's 7 negative and 2 above 0, right? So there's 10 settings, and it works with all autofocus capable EF lenses, like these great ones we have today. But so that's the beauty of using this type of glass with this camera, and in that particular setting that you're talking about, which is one of the AF methods. It's called FlexiZone Single. You can adjust the speed and the sensitivity response. So you can also not just adjust the speed of the rack or the transition, the focus shift, if you will, but you can also adjust to have it ignore subjects crossing frame or to pick them up quickly, whichever one you need.
This is incredible. It seems to me that we hear a lot as photographers, and we have said a lot as photographers, that it's not the camera that takes a great picture. It requires the photographer to be an artist. You gentlemen have built your life on that. Now there's 4K video workflow, and people can just shoot the video and extract frames. Are you worried about your jobs?
You know, there's something to be said about light and everything else that we study and practice on a regular basis, but I think it does bring the table closer. You know, the person just getting up into the HDSLR market, you know, moving up from a point-and-shoot camera, whatever else, they can now live their lives. They don't have to be professionals or even, you know, advanced amateurs, but somebody taking that moment of a new baby and getting that little giggle that they weren't really ever capable of capturing before. Beautiful. So it brings all of us to that decisive moment now, with having so many decisions that we can make after the fact.
Right, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, I think this is a game changer. I would say maybe we should quantify it, at least in the wedding space, saying for available light photography, because obviously much of a wedding is done with the strobe. It just has to be because dark receptions, as I mentioned, I like to bounce, but still I'm using a strobe. But of course, this technique of 4K would not actually do this business at 30 frames per second with a flash. That's not going to happen. But for available light moments, I love the example of the little infant child, window lit, you know, just doing neat things. I have a new grandchild, Bennett, who I can just see it right now. We're photographing Bennett at 4K at 30 frames a second. We've picked our shutter and all that business. We got exactly what we want. We pick out the frame we like. 8.8 megapixels is certainly plenty, well beyond plenty for social media, but for a nice print, I've got it there too. So for available light photography, I think it is a major, it's a quantum leap. for flash photography, it doesn't really affect that. Other enhancements are happening there, but it's a very exciting time to be in our world.
Well, and I do want to talk about available light with respect to video as well, because Ken, you've spent some time shooting HDR video, and those are not terms that we normally think of together, HDR and video. Tell me a little bit about your experience, if you would.
Gladly. You know, it's one of the exciting things that I think I came across, and just examining the camera and what can I do to make my photography better in the field. You know, it gives us that ability to go out and see things and capture things better than we've ever been able to. So when you're in a challenging environment, you know, and capturing video, we have so much less that we can do in post-production compared to our stills that we're used to, gradient tools and everything to adjust certain areas. Being able to capture in video, knowing that your highlights are going to come in and that you open your shadows.
Yeah, we're seeing that right now.
Is just brilliant.
So just a little bit about the technology behind this. You're actually shooting this. It's only selectable at 30 frames per second, but it is actually shooting 60 frames and alternating frames of normal exposure with underexposure and reconstituting those in camera for processing. So it is a true kind of HDR process like that. It's not faking you out in any way, right?
It's not at all, and you know, again, tying it all together, because I think that we're making these decisions really quickly. When we're out somewhere photographing something and we're examining what's going on the back of the camera, and boy, I know I'm analyzing it all the time. Do I need to bump my exposure a little bit? What's going on? What do I need to do to make this a better image? You know, knowing that I have the ability, that the camera now has that ability, that I can just go in quickly, and during my testing, I'm trying to shoot very, very similar situations, that I'd stop recording for a second, get onto the back of that touch screen, get into video. It was just a simple boom, boom. I was in HDR video. I was back to regular video. I can do anything I want really, really quickly. So it doesn't take a lot of understanding of the camera, because the camera has come to us with being friendly now.
That's a cool new feature, and actually, it's a trend. It's a feature that's been brought up to the big leagues, tried out at the 80D level, right? And now we're in the 5D Mark IV with it, which is what's cool. And there's more things like that in here, like the time-lapse movie that Ken talked about is actually more or less a Cinema EOS item that you've seen brought in here that completes a 1920 by 1080 finished movie in camera, ready to go, up to 2-minute clips. I didn't mention this. I don't want to get away from this without saying it. You know, this camera now shoots 120 frames a second. It's a very important big add and adds a lot of versatility to the EOS movie.
It's incredible, and it is next level information for our viewers. Now, you said you didn't want to skip over something. I have skipped over something in still photography that Rudy and I have talked about before the show that I absolutely want Rudy to talk about, and that is the new technology, and we've been seeing this a little bit on the rumor websites. You can refocus after you take the picture with this new RAW. What the heck is going on? Now, this is still, this is not video, but would you define it a little bit and tell our audience about expectations and what is happening?
Yeah, it's a new feature on the 5D Mark IV called Dual Pixel RAW. And what it's going to let you do is, the camera, of course, will let you shoot RAW images in the way we always have. So you can shoot RAW, and it can be with no differences compared to the way you've done it all along. But there's a separate menu setting you can turn on, activate Dual Pixel RAW. And what happens is when you do that, you get a larger file. And it utilizes information from the Dual Pixel CMOS imaging sensor. Normally, in the past, that's only been used for focusing purposes when we're in live view or in video. But even if you're shooting through the viewfinder, the system can take an additional piece of information from each pixel and basically record it as, if you will, parallax information. And then, when you bring the images into Canon's Digital Photo Professional software to process the RAW files, you can process them in the ordinary way, once again, and that's fine. But there is a menu command and a pull-down menu where you can bring in what we call the RAW Image Optimizer, or the Dual Pixel Optimizer, excuse me. And it's going to give you 3 options. You can apply any of the 3. And one of them is going to be what we call an image micro adjustment, where you can very slightly alter where the sharpest part of the image is. And you can move that forward slightly or backward slightly.
Okay, now before we go too far, Ken's like, it's great, it's
Yeah.
great. So, Denis, would you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, well, when I saw this, and the folks at Canon showed me this when they showed the Explorers, the camera, a couple months ago in Los Angeles.
Have you used this?
I actually have not, but I've seen it. I've watched the Canon guys demonstrate it multiple times directly in front of me, a small group of us. And one of the things I thought of immediately, and I mentioned this to you, Rudy, how many wedding photographers take out their macro lenses, not with a tripod, handheld, because they see maybe it's the ring, the bride's ring, a nice little diamond, but a macro lens handheld in the throes of a wedding, even though, the bride may be moving, you may be moving, whatever. How many photographs would benefit from this technology just to tweak the sharpness? Because a diamond doesn't sparkle unless it's absolutely crisply in focus. But a macro lens, handheld, not with a tripod, with a subject who's probably moving because she's excited, the answer is this is a wonderful thought. It makes a much larger file, we should mention, because a raw file on this camera, the 5D4, is normally about 30 megs. When you use the dual RAW, now you're up to 60 megs. So it's a big file.
Yeah.
But I promise you, if I was doing any type of macro work, particularly handheld macro work with a moving subject, I'm absolutely going to activate this feature to allow me in DPP. That's the free software that comes with the camera, Canon's wonderful program. I'm going to use that program to fine-tune the sharpness exactly. It's not going to refocus an image, but it's going to give you that little, I would call it micro adjustment that may make the difference between an acceptable shot and an excellent photograph. And that's what we want. We want excellence.
And there are a couple other things that this dual pixel RAW does.
That's the interesting thing, is that you have actually 2 other additional options. Now, you can only apply one of them. You can't apply 2 or 3 in combination. The second choice you have is what they call a bokeh shift, where you can focus upon a subject, and then you can laterally, in a horizontal shot, you can laterally move slightly your background and foreground information to the left or the right using sliders right on the computer screen when you're processing your raw file. And then the final option you have is what they call a ghost reduction. With certain types, and I want to caution people, this isn't with just any type of lens flare, but with certain types of lens flare from light sources that are just outside the lens axis, you can bring up an image and then literally draw a box around the flare, and the system will process it and reduce it when it is capable of doing so. The changes that can be done with the dual pixel RAW technology, as we're seeing it now, are subtle, but they do represent, as Denis said, some interesting and compelling opportunities for people who are doing certain types of photography.
Rudy, could I ask you to also expound upon something we spoke about earlier? This business of flicker, it's an issue under certain types of lighting. I remember when I was a sports photographer back in Louisiana days, way back, high school sports, the lighting sometimes would have a flicker and the exposures would vary wildly. The 5D4 has introduced in this camera a 5D a numbered camera, like a 1, 2, 3, now the 4, for the first time, a technology that actually addresses that flicker. Could you?
That's a great point, Denis, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And I want to be clear, this has nothing to do with the dual pixel RAW we just talked about. Now we're talking about a separate feature. And again, we've seen this on a few other recent cameras. The 7D Mark II is the first one, the EOS 1DX, and the 5DS, 5DSR have it as well. But the color metering system in the camera, when we're shooting through the viewfinder, not live view, but when we're shooting ordinary pictures through the viewfinder, the color metering system is fast enough that it can recognize flickering light, mercury vapor lights, sodium vapor lights, and so on, that flicker on and off. And if it detects that these lights are flickering, you have the option of turning on an anti-flicker feature that will literally change the timing of the shutter in still images to match the peak brightness of the lights that are flickering on and off at roughly 60 times a second. And the interesting thing here is that, like the 1DX, it's actually refined over what we had in, for instance, the 7D Mark II. Remarkable in the 7D Mark II that we had that technology. Here, the system is even smarter, so if the flickering is happening over just a portion of the image rather than the whole scene, it is able to detect that and again alter shutter timing slightly so that exposures you take, whether single shots or continuous, will happen at the peak instant of the light's brightness, so you won't tend to get varying exposures and varying color densities and that kind of thing.
And the viewfinder will tell you when you're looking through it that there's a flicker issue that's being addressed by the technology.
That's a great point.
Yeah, the new viewfinder, what is it called, intelligent or whatever?
Right.
The intelligent viewfinder has new features that we never had before. If I change from AI servo to one shot, it'll verify it with a beautiful little notice in the viewfinder, and just like Flickr and other things. So Canon has smartened that up incredibly to make it where you are in control of this ship, and this ship is sailing in a great direction, but it's showing you exactly what's going on.
It's another dimension of the phrase a full information viewfinder.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, Ken, we talked before we went live on the air about your workflow. And you shoot everything. Obviously, we've seen some beautiful time-lapse work. We've seen a number of videos of yours and still images and across a number of genre. How do you look at this tool now? How does this affect you in your workflow?
Well, you know, great question there, because I kind of share that with my students all the time, that I now have a tool that allow me to really complete my vision. You know, and I think that's very, very exciting, that when we think of accessories, you know, there's so many things that go along with our cameras and that we carry along, and I consider this in my camera bag. When I unzip that camera bag, we start making decisions. What body am I grabbing? Am I going to my 5D3 or now 5D4? Is the 1DX Mark II based upon what criteria? But then the decision making continues as to what lens am I putting on, and now I have that comfort and ability to be able to switch into the different modes of the camera. So I can analyze something in front of me. I had a setting sun. I'm watching a sun in the desert drop over a mountain, just go hide behind the mountain. And it didn't take long to kind of do quick calculations to say, if I do this as a time lapse, it's never going to be long enough. The single frame doesn't tell that story. I need to go to video for this. So I have these tools at my beck and call now to think, I'm going to shift over from still thinking. I've got a viewfinder that I keep in there for critical focus and the ability to, if I'm hand holding, you know, correctly brace the camera and support the camera, so I've got the steadiest shot that I can have. But I can switch in just a nanosecond to create something else. And to me, that's very, very exciting, because you're continually making these decisions as to recognizing a subject, and if I'm out in the field, something comes across me, and I switch. I'm going to switch my focus method, possibly, my mode of capture, where it goes from aperture to shutter priority. Now I can just go and get into capturing things like we elaborated with the time-lapse. I still love individual frames to capture for that time-lapse, because it gives me the best of both worlds, where I still have a 30.4 megapixel frame, and now I've got 300 or 500 of them. So, you know, in photographing meteors, you know, the whole idea, the meteor has to be there and the camera's going to be open in order for me to capture that. So what is best going to actually capture that vision of mine? And it's wonderful to think I don't need anything else in front of me but the ability to know where to find that. And what you brought up, the intelligent viewfinder. How nice when you're sitting and your eye is up to that frame to know that you have everything there. The camera's designed ergonomically in a vertical or horizontal position, so that you're always able to brace that camera, hold it for the best quality photograph, but you have everything at your fingertips that you never have to take your eye away from the viewfinder in making your decisions.
And in doing your shooting, you do an awful lot of inclement weather. You chase lightning, and this is an amazing camera body. And I'm going to try and juggle this out. The magnesium alloy body is incredible. Is it more weather sealed, or maybe this is a question I should point at my friends from Canon. Is it more weather sealed than previous versions of the 5D?
Absolutely. Yes, it is. It's the previous 5D was pretty well sealed against dirt and moisture. This is even more extensively sealed. And the engineers are saying that the level of sealing on this camera and weather resistance is about the same as a 7D Mark II, which is to say, very good.
Well, I thought it was interesting earlier when Ken said that he was very comfortable with this camera because it was just like the other camera, but in reality, they've redesigned every single component, and including the sealing. So it's the same form factor, but it's they've taken another step to making it work through harsh conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So as a professional, you're sure that when you go out to get a shot, like Ken's out in a thunderstorm, well, he understands and appreciates the fact that his camera will come back working from that condition, right?
And that's so true. You know, the best part of this is not worrying about the camera, although I do protect it when I can. But boy, in the middle of a thunderstorm, in the middle of a dust storm, we get so much extreme weather in the Arizona desert that this is just perfect for it. And unknowingly, I put myself through that test where I had often shoot with a couple of cameras, more than one at a time, different focal lengths, even different, if I'm photographing thunderstorms, I want from different perspectives. And going back and forth between the cameras, a lot of times I can't be near one camera. And to know that it's slightly covered, but boy, it's getting wet, it's getting dirty, whatever's going on, the constant change of weather, feeling comfortable that camera is totally protected and it's still going to perform for me because I'm really pushing it to the limits, being high temperature, dirt, rain, and then extreme cold when I go up to photograph the aurora. So I really have had the ability to play with this camera in its extremes, and it performs magnificently.
I want to get some special gloves so I can use the touch screen when it gets really cold.
I want to mention one other. It's a fairly small point to some, but then to others maybe not. This is the first in the fives, the numbered fives, 1, 2, 3, 4, where we get now, and with big thanks to Canon, a spreading of the vertical spacing of the focus points. So now the elusive rule of thirds that I remember from my first photography class at University of Louisiana, USL in those days, way back when, you know, composition with the rule of thirds. Well, we weren't quite there, but now they've been able to, without making the body much larger, in fact, it's actually smaller, we now have the focus points in a really lovely spot. Of course, 61 points, we know that. I think, is it 40? Help me with my numbers. 41 of them are cross sensors, so they're incredibly sensitive, but the positions themselves to me are more logical in terms of composition. I spend a lot of time with my eye. I'm left eye, but my left eye is to the viewfinder. I'm using my finger with the joystick, the controller, to pick my focus points. And now, for the first time, I've got more height and I've got more at the bottom, so I can, in essence, get to where I'm looking for to get the composition that I was taught way back in college days.
If I can just add one thing to that, Dennis is absolutely right. It's not the same focusing sensor. It's actually, it is the same as the EOS 1DX Mark II, and that's where the expanded height of the point coverage comes in that Dennis spoke so eloquently about. But another benefit you pull out from that is that with version 3 Canon teleextenders and certain specific lenses, you can now have autofocus at an effective f8 maximum aperture at every focusing point. So you're
At
not,
all of them?
Yeah. It's a remarkable feature. Now, we introduced that with the 1DX Mark II earlier this year. But the fact that now, you know, wildlife photographers, nature photographers, and so on, even sports photographers in some instances, can throw an extender onto certain lenses, be working with a maximum effective aperture with that extender of f8, and still get autofocus at every single focusing point. It's a remarkable feature, and we're the first system in the industry that's allowed users to do that, doing through the lens, or through the viewfinder, excuse me, focusing.
And of course, while these people are out in the photographing wildlife, enjoying that great f8 capability, they also have GPS, which is now built in, so it's weather protected. That's a very nice feature as well. So life is good.
Good point.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I don't want to stop talking about this camera ever, but we do have some other announcements from Canon, including a couple of incredible lenses, some new versions of existing lenses. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about this. You've had a chance to shoot with them. The guys will be able to tell us a little bit more about the technology. Specifically, we have a 24-105 f4. This is L glass, and it is the Mark II version of the 24-105. And also announced today was the 16-35 f2.8 L glass Mark III version. Why do people care about this? Does anybody have an opinion?
I shot them both last week, and I'll say they're both amazing, and I use them exclusively wide open. I use the 24-105 at f4 of a model dressed as a bride in my dear friend Parrish Kohanam, who's also an explorer of light, his studio in Atlanta. and the sharpness is there. It's just it's a nice refinement of an already very good lens. But let's understand what Canon's up to here. Anytime you increase the pixel count by 40%, we're up to 30. They even make cameras now that are 50 on the 5D platform, obviously, 50 megapixels. It means that the optics have to be up to snuff. They've got to be at par to be able to resolve to that quality sensor. So the bigger the sensor, the better the glass that's required. And that's what's going on here. We have version 3 of the 1635. I've got 2 of these on order right this minute because I need these for my wedding work. It's an absolute must-have lens in the wedding space. And this one, the Type 3 that's just introduced today, is impeccably, uber sharp. It's remarkable. So now Canon gives us the 3 necessary parts of our camera case, all of them in superb zoom form, all of them Type L, obviously. The 16-35 28L Type 3 that comes out today, the 24-70 28L Type 2 that came out a couple years ago, and of course the remarkable 70-200 28L IS, which is kind of a standard for so many photographers in the world today. But those 3 in a bag, a couple of 1D4s, a couple of the 600EX2 flashes, some of these cards, 64s, I like now maybe the 128s, that's a good size. But in essence, it doesn't take the equipment it used to in the olden days. We used to be so focused on prime lenses because of sharpness, but now these lenses they're just mind-bogglingly sharp, and they, in essence, are like having multiple prime lenses in one. And certainly the new 16-35 introduced today is a perfect example of that. The 20, the 24, the 35, it's really mega sharp at all those lenses. And also I would add 16 to that as well. Incredible at 16.
Well, I want to throw a question at my friends from Canon. Some of the camera nerds out there, like myself, want to know about what are these new coatings, what are they doing, what's going on with that, how is this magic happening with these new lenses?
That's an interesting question, Larry. In the 16-35, for instance, we're seeing 2 new coating technologies. And when I say new, this isn't the first time we've used them, but they are recently developed. One is called sub-wavelength structure coating, which is abbreviated SWC. And it's a coating on certain surfaces of certain elements in the lens. And what it does is it is able to reduce flare and internal reflections when light is coming in at a very strong angle. So if this is our lens pointing straight up, if light's coming in from a strong angle, it's able to deal with that. And cut reflections and so on. The other, which is a unique Canon development called ASC, or Air Sphere Coating, is a second new technology which we apply within the lens, and that deals more effectively with flare that's generated from light coming straight into the lens or nearly straight into the lens. So both of these lenses benefit in terms of less flare in heavily backlit situations, and then beyond that, on top of coatings, they are remarkably sharp, and in particular, the 16-35, just to echo what Denis said, particularly at the edges, this thing is sharp. This is the real deal. That's where some critical users were able to find fault with previous versions of our ultra-wide lenses. This one, the 16-35 version 3, is really something special.
So do we even need the lens correction that's built into the camera now?
That's a good question.
What does that lens correction do, and how will it affect other lenses?
I'm glad you asked that question too, Larry. We've had lens aberration correction in our cameras for some time now. The ability for the camera to be able to either tag raw files with information or to actually apply corrections to things like vignetting, color fringing, and so on. With the new 5D Mark IV, though, we've taken it a couple of steps further and brought into the camera the digital lens optimizer technology, which used to be only something you could do in our digital photo professional software when you processed a raw file. And basically, what this is going to do on a lens-by-lens basis, the engineers have looked into what are some of the aberrations a given lens has at certain focal lengths, certain focus distances, and certain apertures. And we're able to literally, on a case-by-case basis, combat those and restore image quality that can be lost either through the lens itself or through things like the low-pass filter in front of the lens, in front of the imaging sensor, excuse me, the IR cut filter, and so on. So it really leverages the power that's built into your lens system, this digital lens optimizer, and you can turn it on and off in the menu.
Rudy, didn't Canon engineers actually include a specific chip, a processor, in the 5D Mark IV to handle that one function?
That's absolutely correct, Dennis. There is a Digix 6 processor, a separate one, which just deals with digital lens optimizer corrections because they are very processor intensive.
This is why we're seeing images that are just incredibly sharp, just incredibly without vignetting, without other issues. So any aberration that a lens has through the optical design is nearly negated, and that could happen even with an in-camera JPEG, I would imagine. You don't need to pull it into software.
That's the beauty of this, is now for the first time, we're able to apply digital lens optimizer technology for people who are working with a JPEG workflow. We understand a lot of our serious users shoot RAW, but if you're working with a JPEG workflow, shooting JPEGs in the camera, digital lens optimizer can give you sharper pictures right out of the box.
That's the first time ever that I've ever heard that.
Right.
That's just a remarkable feature.
First time in our system.
Yeah.
Ken and Dennis, I would like to ask you as users, obviously you did a lot of handhold shooting with these cameras that you've been working with. What's the handheld experience like? You've got 30 megapixels to work with. What's the sharpness like? Do you operate differently to maintain a sharp final image with a 30 megapixel camera?
You want to take it first?
Gladly. It's ever being conscious of your shutter speed. So I think we're both in agreement of creeping that shutter speed up a little bit because of the bigger file now. And I know I was introduced to that thought with this predecessor, the 5DS and the 5DSR, that it didn't need to be solely tripod mounted or limited in any way. It's an ever improvement of your camera handling technique. And I think just being aware all the time of where you are with exposure. So we kind of get a little soft because Canon's provided us image stabilization in the lenses, and I think so many people think that there's, it's a godsend, but it's not to be relied upon. It's a nice cushion, where I think just that little bit of thought that goes into now that decision making, and I refer to this a couple of times through our conversation here. We make decisions all the time. And it's up to us to understand what we have in this powerful tool and how we can best bring that out. So moving up that little bit in shutter speed is going to put us in that area where we don't have to worry about camera movement because it's going to be magnified now on this larger file.
I would echo exactly that, Larry. I would say in the days where we were happy at 125, 125th of a second, we're going to suddenly have probably a better comfort at 160, if not 200, just to make sure that we're getting the full value. The sensor is amazing. The images are impeccably sharp. But if there's motion blur, wouldn't that negate a lot of the greatness that you have in the tool? I mean, the tool is there to give you incredible images. So when a tripod isn't appropriate, especially, I'm going to creep my shutter speed up. But like Ken, once or twice, going north.
And you don't lose because of the added light sensitivity.
Yeah, I would say exactly. And if you wanted to say, if you say, well, there's not enough light to do that, well, then here comes the easier ability to raise ISO. There is also one new button on the 5D Mark IV, which is one intended to be, help me here, Rudy, the AF zone selection button. Is that right?
AF area select button.
AF area select button, and it's kind of right where your thumb is, and if I had enough hands, I'd show you. But it's basically a little button that can actually be programmed. And some of us, I know when I was in California testing this camera a couple months ago, I set mine to be, let me put it right here, and let Ken, thanks. Yeah, it's this button right here. It's right by that Q button, and it's basically one where it can be programmed. It's between the joystick and the Q button. It's an extra little wonderful button for my thumb. It can be the AF zone, help me again, or the AF zone selector, or we can program it, as I've done, to be ISO. And I mention ISO because if we need to go to 200th of a second, I may need more ISO to support that given the equivalence of light. Obviously, if I'm at 125 in the past, with a given amount of light, but I need to be at 200, something's got to give somewhere. Either I've got to pick it up by aperture, or what I'll do is I'll touch that button and I'll pick up the ISO by by a third, or 2/3 of a stop to offset that necessary increase in shutter. So again, back to what Ken said, because I fully agree. Let me hand that back to you. To what Ken said, I fully agree. I think 1 or 2 shutter speeds north was probably not a bad idea with a camera with that much, that many megapixels, or on a tripod, of course, as well. It works fine in real world, but it's something to be aware of.
Ken, I wanted to ask you, if you get your microphone back, I wanted to ask you about this camera. And obviously you have a lot of students in a lot of different circumstances. They have lots of different backgrounds. How would you describe this camera to your students? Who is ideal for this, or who shouldn't miss out on getting this camera? Who should stay away from it? You know, what is this camera ideal for?
I think this camera is pretty ideal for anybody with photographic interest. I can't see this being pigeonholed to any one genre of photography. You know, as we've spoken about with the video strengths and all the different tools that are built into this, I can't see this being limited to anyone in particular, but I think it's really going to give a second thought now to those people that are considering entry-level cameras, because we're not that far away in cost, and why not move into this? And I really want to back up one step. I hope you won't mind this. You know, one of the strengths that I recognize, Dennis, out of you sharing that button and all of the assignable buttons on this camera, that when you're not used to something, or if you don't like the way that it is, you can customize it in a heartbeat. So this camera it has to be understood for its strengths, and then as a photographer, you move into this camera and you make it you. Now, I wasn't aware of being able to put my ISO button there, but I know, and we do things by reflex and by our history and experience. But I got to think that anybody that moves into this camera, be it a landscape photographer, you bring up fashion photographers, and people photographers, I'll kind of narrow it down that way. Anybody can move into this camera and have awesome results, because you are not limited really in any way, shape, or form. You actually have more dexterity with this because of the different methods of capture that you're able to go into. And I hope before time goes by, we can talk a little bit more about that in-camera time lapse, because I think that's going to be a big help to everybody that's been afraid to go into that, not wanting to have to get extra software to do this, not wanting to have all of those files to manage.
Like you don't have to buy the TCN80N3 anymore, right? There goes the intervalometer.
Well,
yeah, right. Well, okay,
you
we're going to want it.
But
no,
yes.
You're going to want it. I agree, but
Well,
you don't have to have it.
You guys have no idea how elegantly you have transitioned to our next section, where we're going to talk all about accessories, because obviously there are more things going on here than just the camera and the lenses. You can't go anywhere without a memory card. You need memory cards. So really quickly, Rudy, would you tell me what are the 2 memory card slots in here, and what are we looking for?
Well, the cool thing right off the bat is that we use the same memory card technology as we did with the previous generation camera. So for most people that are considering stepping up to this, you're not going to have to invest in totally new types of cards. We've got a CF card slot, a compact flash card slot, and an SD card slot. I'll turn it over to Brent, and he can talk about the speed requirements, particularly if you're going to be shooting 4K video, which of course places great demands on a card's reading speed, or writing speed, excuse me.
It's really, well, one of the good features here is you can use some of the cards you've had if they're good enough, but UDMA 7 for the CF card if you're going to be using that 4K video feature. But you can also shoot 4K video with the SD card, as long as you've got a good enough SD card, and that's Speed Class 3, it's a UHS 1 card, but you need a good one. You need one that is capable of sustaining a peak write speed that will sustain and record 4K footage. So,
and that is just perfect, because I would like to tell everyone about the Lexar 64 gigabyte Professional 1066X compact flash card. This is a great choice. It's UDMA 7, and it's going to serve those faster shooting speeds, those higher demands, and the 4K video that we have with the 5D Mark IV. Mm-hmm. Second up, we're going to look at an amazing piece of gear, the Atomos Ninja Blade Recorder. This is something that's ideal for filmmakers. They're going to appreciate the ProRes recording and solid state capability because it connects to the camera's 5D HDMI
Larry,
port.
I own this as well right here, and I love this recorder for all the times that I'm getting the clean HDMI signals. The beauty of this camera working with an accessory like that is you can still use the touchscreen and put out a clean HDMI signal to the recorder. So you're not hampered by using it, and you can then choose to select a different recording codec or at a higher subsampling. It's a good feature. It's a good item to have. Everyone
Yeah,
should have
it
one.
absolutely is. One of the things that I tell people all the time when they're moving from having done only stills into video, the very first sign that you are not a good videographer is that you have echoey video. And so you definitely, the onboard mics are nice for capturing birthday parties, but when you're actually doing a video, you want a professional mic. The VP83 lens hopper from Shure is an on-camera microphone. It's designed to capture clean audio right there into the camera, and the camera, of course, has two very important ports. It's got the microphone port and the headphone jack, so we can monitor our audio while we're going through it.
I've got an important thing to add about that. When you're shooting live video, you can actually change both of those levels while you're recording. So you can, if you set it manual, for instance, you can see the peak meters there and make adjustments through the touchscreen with very little motion interruption to your recording, and also your headphone level. If you can crank that up while you're shooting, it's right there. It stays up while you go into record.
Now, we're talking about this camera from the perspective of being a still camera and a video camera, and I want to talk to you a little bit about tripods with that in mind. There are 3 different tripod suggestions we have from Manfrotto. For photography, a video option for photography, and there's an option that uses the 504 HD head. There's also a hybrid option that is based on the 502 HD head, and you can do still photography or video or the blended with these different options from Manfrotto. So you want to look at those, and I'm sure if they aren't already, if you go to the B&H website and look at the listing for the camera, check under the accessories tab. These will probably be there. And by the way, we're coming down really close to the end where we're going to answer some of your questions. So if you haven't pre-ordered this camera, you want to do that now, because that's how you become eligible to possibly win. Only pre-orders during this live event are eligible to win, so make sure that you take advantage of that. Lastly, I want to talk to you about a light panel. This is a light panel brick bicolor LED, and it provides rugged on-camera light that can provide hours of additional light that switches between tungsten and daylight. And you know this is critical. We can't always work with available light, and we do need to add light sometimes when we're doing those kinds of things.
Those are really nice to have. Everyone needs one. I kind of agree with what Denis said, though. You know, don't necessarily always run it on the top of your camera and shine as bright as it can do. You know, be creative with it. It's one of the good things about having it. It doesn't have to play on the camera, right? You
can always tell pro photographers and videographers when they bounce light off something instead of crush people's faces with it. We're going to head into the part that involves you, the audience. And hopefully a lot of you have, and we have some questions already starting to line up, participated by asking questions. In the Q&A segment, we're pulling questions that have been asked on social media, Twitter and Facebook, with the hashtag BHPhotoLive. And so let me get to that section in my little device here. And we're going to get to the very first question. I'm going to throw this out to the panel and ask you from MCH Images wants to know, how exactly does 1.74x crop affect 4K video? What do we need to be aware of to maximize its video abilities?
Well, how exactly...
Put the mic up.
Oh, excuse me. I was trying to read the question. The 1.74 crop factor. Now, this is a little more crop factor than we're used to, and this has to do with the 30.4 megapixel sensor. There's a lot more pixels. It's a little denser in there, right? So it's kind of like if you had an APS-C sensor, like a 7D Mark II. The crop factor is very similar. The 1.74, if you were shooting a 50 in full HD, would be somewhere around an 85 in 4K. It would look like that, right? It would have that same focal length style. We have some great, I actually did this as an example image in the video that we put on the Canon website that explains some of this more in depth. So I'll steer you over to the Canon USA website, if I may, but after you order this camera, right?
I think, real quick, I think an important distinction to make here is that when you're shooting 4K with the camera, it's literally pulling on a pixel per pixel basis the 4K video information from just that 4K area of the central part of the imaging sensor, rather than the whole 24 by 36 millimeter full frame sensor we think of as still photographers. But when you go to HD or full HD, you're back to using the full sensor area. So just to echo what Brent said, really, if you're shooting 4K, the only real concern a user would have is just to remember that if you're thinking in 35 millimeter, your lenses are going to be more of a telephoto, if you will, than they would otherwise, since you're only recording 4K with part of the sensor.
So it's being aware of the lens we put on before we start. It's nothing that we have to do in our practice of video once we start shooting.
Right. You know, this is what they want. I mean, I don't know, maybe you want something else, but I'm going to tell you that I think that this is the right way to process 4K video, to get that pixel for pixel representation, instead of the alternative method, which would be to do something like, you know, pixel banning or
interpolating
or something, and you'll end up with a lot of artifacts on your finished video. This is, to me,
purist, I would say.
yeah, you remember on the 1DC, they used a Super 35 crop factor. It reminds me a little bit of that, but it's a very sharp image, very clear, very nice.
I would think that that 1635 becomes a very appropriate lens for 4K recording.
Absolutely.
Maybe even
for gimbal work, especially, you would have such a good focal length to work with there.
given the multiplier factor, that almost becomes your normal lens, basically.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
This is one I'd like each of us to answer, and Ken, I actually asked you a similar question to this before, but Max America is asking, is it worth upgrading from the 5D Mark III? What are the most notable upgrades? And so, because I'm going to ask you each to come up with something, I'm going to start at the far end. Ken, you've already answered this to a degree, so just limit it to just a couple of things that that really made you say, wow, when you started using this camera.
Well, I guess I'd have three things that really bring my attention to this camera and separate it from the predecessors. That first being the touch screen and the ability to change everything on the fly just as quickly as you can. That's really important to me. The second part is being able to have 4K on board. I actually love that. And then a derivation of that, having that internal in-camera time-lapse capture. And I can see this, Dennis, going into your arena with weddings, that people, you don't have time to set things up, you're capturing thousands of images. Here now it's done. So to have something of the ceremony, to have something of these different areas, I just think it's brilliant for the person who doesn't need to get involved in all of the post-processing.
So the upgrade value, Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we market ourselves very effectively through wedding planners primarily as superlatives. You know, we're aiming for a clientele that expects absolutely the best, no compromise. And really, for me, it's going to be image quality. As much as the 5D3 is lovely, the reality is that the 5D4 has a better image. Why? We've got megapixel, we have a refined noise reduction, we've got a higher processor from 5+ to 6+, so I know it's doing magical things. For me, I want no compromises. So if I've got to update my cameras, and I've got mine on order right now, I'm basically, maybe I'll get one free. I'm not sure if that works that way. Am I eligible to, never mind. No, the point of it is, no, we're definitely going to move to 5D4s because all about image quality. Yes, everything Ken said is absolutely correct, and I think those are great points. But in terms of what ultimately pushes me over the top to say, I'm going to trade, and by the way, the trade values on the 3s are not bad at all. They're actually excellent. I'm going to trade my 3s, all of them. I think we might probably have 4 in the office, and we're going to get 4 of the Mark IVs. Because we want no compromise. We want no other competitor to have an image that's cleaner, sharper, higher resolving power than ours. We want no compromise.
I'm going to go, you know, you stole about, I think you mentioned 3, so at least 2 of those were going to be mine if you didn't say the first one, but I'll
That's why I made you guys go last. You're the Canon guys. You You got to come up with it.
I love remote control work. I used to shoot a lot of automotive advertising. Always had a car mounted with a camera somewhere while I was driving, while we were shooting the other side of it with the A camera, right? But I mean, I like the remote control. The built-in Wi-Fi is a very important feature with this camera, but I'm going to add my other one that like Ken got in there. I like the frame rates in this camera. I think it's an important reason to step up.
Rudy, what would you tell people? What things have we not yet revealed?
Well, they've all hit on some real good ones, and I certainly could have mentioned a few, but I think one thing is the focusing power that this camera has, and that applies whether you're using the 61-point system through the viewfinder or whether you're working live view or video with the dual pixel CMOS AF. Either way, there are no compromises in terms of focusing performance, and it doesn't matter if you're trying to focus on a macro subject or if you're shooting NFL football. This is a camera that is extremely, extremely capable, and that applies to the video side of the aisle as well.
Gentlemen, you're regular 5D3 users, and this question comes to us from Aaron Savard, and the question is, how good is the low light? So is it an sort of noticeable incremental? Is it wow?
Image quality is amazing. Low light capability, extraordinary. My work is all on pre-production cameras, and I'm waiting for the final one where I can use RAW in my normal software. I do like Adobe's products as well for software like Lightroom. So those things are going to come I imagine, in September. DPP, of course, is magnificent. It's also in beta, at least its support of this camera. So that's to be determined in terms of how much, but without question, it's a step ahead of the 5D3. 5D3 is certainly very nice in the noise area. This one, by images I've seen with my own eyes, and as we mentioned earlier, this business of waking up a shadow in post-production, without question, there's more image there. I like having the added megapixels as well, but in terms of pure noise and dynamic range, which are somewhat interrelated when we start waking up shadow areas, I think the camera stands ahead, above the 5D3 in that regard. That's yet another reason that I generally broadly classify as image quality. It is a bump in image quality. Is it a revolutionary camera? I'd say probably not. It is an evolutionary camera, but they've touched so many components over 4.5 years of technology and engineering that the result is it's like a work of art. It's just a lovely refinement of a familiar friend, as you said earlier, Ken. That's gotten even better.
I know that's one of the things they addressed was noise reduction in the processing of this image. But one of the byproducts of it is that the AF is improved in low light situations and with that expanded ISO. In fact, we hardly even touched on ISO, but it's one of the most important upgrades here. Is you're basically bumping up 4K HD still, and now we're expandable up to 102,400, but low light AF is much improved, and I don't see the noise in the higher ISOs that I saw with the 5D3 personally.
Is that what you've experienced, Ken? You're out there at night. You're shooting these beautiful night scenes.
And yes, I think Denis really touched on it, that it's not a remarkable jump, but it is an improvement to the 5D3. And that's the thing that I love about what we produce. And when something comes out, I'm going to the next model because I know that processor is so much further advanced. So here, 4.5 years later, there's so many things we have here. But yes, the noise has been improved. The high ISO is there for us so that we can get out into very, very weak light, if no light at all. And I'm capturing starlight on an absolute dark, no moon evening to spectacular results with those little pinpoint stars.
That's great. We've touched on this a little bit, but in case somebody has tuned in late, Yanni Benani has asked the question, what's the max frames per second it can shoot video in? So let's run down through that.
120 frames per second. 120 frames per second, and that is at 1287.20, by the way. That's the max speed.
Okay, and at the other sizes?
The full HD is 60p, that's 60 frames per second, and you can do that in a couple of flavors. And in the 4K, it's up to 30p.
Okay, great. Next, we have a question from Jay Deplater. How does dual pixel RAW work? Hope it can be supported in Lightroom soon. So, Rudy, we talked a little bit about dual pixel RAW. What is required to use those dual pixel RAW functions?
Well, again, in terms of what's in the camera, You basically have to tell it you want to shoot a raw file, a full res raw file, and then a separate menu item in the shooting menu, enable dual pixel raw. So both of them have to be active. And then you go about shooting your pictures as you ordinarily would. Right now, in terms of processing them, the only way I can assure you you can get a dual pixel raw image processed is with the Canon Digital Photo Professional software that comes with the camera. And you have the option of processing it normally and doing any raw image adjustments that you might normally do. But then you can call in, as I mentioned, the dual pixel optimizer and actually have a whole palette of choices in terms of the 3 different things that you can do, one of the 3. Now, as to if and when third-party companies, whether it's Adobe or anybody else, will have software that's compatible with the dual pixel raw technology, it's anybody's guess. I have no idea. I'm not saying they won't. I'm just saying we will just have to wait and see.
Yeah, Canon can only speak for Canon, and there is no known path to using dual pixel RAW for processing in Adobe products yet.
Right.
Okay. Our question from Alex MPR. Alex has a last name. Sure, there are more megapixels, but how does the Mark IV sensor stack up against the Mark III, the D750, in terms of dynamic range? Who wants to take that?
I think we've covered some of that where,
Sure.
and I'm not familiar with the 750. I'm sure it's a fine camera, but I have no idea. But as far as the Canon products, I think that we've seen this, honestly, in the past, and I'm pointing to Rudy here, but I also have 1DX Mark II, which is an amazing camera. I find that one also has what appears to be enhanced dynamic range, as told by post-production, as I call it, waking up a dark area. I deal with tuxedos a lot. Sometimes they go sort of dark because of not enough light. If I want to wake them up a little bit, those of us that use Lightroom and maybe use the shadow control slider, same sort of thing. Anytime you're waking up a dark area, I have seen cameras of 2016 from Canon. I have absolutely seen it in the Mark IV because I use that and we play with it extensively over the past couple of months. But certainly even before that in the 1DX Mark II, we've seen an increase, to my eye, in what I would call dynamic range, as told in shadow detail.
Thank you very much. And thank you all, gentlemen. Ken, Denis, Brent, and Rudy, thank you so much for spending some of your afternoon with us today. What we have done this afternoon scratches the surface. There is nothing like getting hands-on with this camera, and the whole reason I agreed to do this is so that I could play with it for 15 minutes after we wrap up here today. Really looking forward to using this camera. I know you still have some questions. That's why B&H is here for you. So make sure that you go on to the B&H Twitter, use the hashtag on Twitter, BHPhotoLive, and ask whatever other questions that you have. We have no problems answering those, and we will continue until all those questions are answered. That's the same thing over on Facebook, and I believe there is even more live stuff going on the Facebook channel, so make sure that you tune in there for some additional information later this afternoon. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time today. Thank you for sharing your experiences with this wonderful new announcement from Canon. Thank you very much from New York.